So these are the four main. I would actually say, so these capabilities are important for all companies, but I think in practice, some companies, so I think typically what you see is that bigger companies are usually better in anticipation, while, for example, startups usually wouldn't do so much anticipation simply because they don't have enough people to do anticipation. But they might be much more responsive. So they might be able to quickly answer if an issue comes up.
In the market economy and in the commercial fields, we have a variety of different capability pillars.
Yeah.
So in a responsible innovation side company, would those pillars be a little bit different? What would they be?
Yeah. So if you talk about the capabilities that are required so I've already said earlier in the theory about responsible innovation, people usually distinguish four main pillars, and I actually think these four pillars nicely correlate to capabilities that are needed for responsible innovation, so also needed. So let me give these four main. So the first pillar is usually called anticipation, and with anticipation we mean the ability to think about the future, but is not so much the ability to predict the future, because that's very likely we're not able to predict it. But it's more the ability actually to think in terms of possible scenarios that might happen in the future. And then in the case of responsible innovation, it is particularly not so much to anticipate, say, future prices or business developments, but future societal developments. Something might happen, or perhaps maybe something happens with your product so that people don't like it anymore, or a risk materializes. So it is also thinking about possible scenarios, including maybe not so positive ones that might happen with your product. And then, of course, doing something with that. So that's the first. So so it has to do with being imaginary, but can also just spending time and manpower on making scenarios, things like that. So that's the first pillar. That's called anticipation. The second pillar is usually called inclusion or engagement, and that pillar is very much about reaching out to a broad audience. And typically in responsible innovation, this is not just your direct clients and users and your shareholders, but a very broad range of stakeholders. So that can be members of the public, it can be governments, it can be NGOs. So this is very much about having a dialogue with these people. It can take different forms. So it can take dialogue. It can even go as far as what's called a co-design or participatory design, that you actually involve these people in your design process. Of course, depends on the company whether you can do that. But this is say related to capabilities of dialogue, of engagement, and so on. So that's the second main pillar. Then the third pillar is called reflexivity, and that's maybe sounds a bit complicated, but the idea of reflexivity is that you're able to articulate what your norms and values and your goals are. So reflexivity is very much about being able to say as a company, not just how do I want to make profit, but how do I want to create what's sometimes called shared value with society. So how I'm creating a product that is in the end maybe not just good for me and my company, but for the whole of society. And to be articulate about what goals, what values you're reasoning from, and of course not just to put them nicely on the website, but also in a way to have that through your entire organization. So that's what reflexivity is about. And the fourth one is called responsiveness. And responsiveness basically means the ability to respond to societal developments, including unexpected. So on the one hand, it relates a bit to things like I said, the inclusivity and the dialogue, picking up signals from society, but it also means the ability. So things like agility are part of that. So being able to maneuver, being able to change things in response to things in society. So these are the four main. I would actually say, so these capabilities are important for all companies, but I think in practice, some companies, so I think typically what you see is that bigger companies are usually better in anticipation, but less good in responsiveness because they cannot quickly answer always to new developments. While, for example, startups usually wouldn't do so much anticipation simply because they don't have enough people to do anticipation, but they might be much more responsive. So they might be able to quickly answer if an issue comes up. So I think all four are important, but the relative importance also depends a bit on the type of company.